experiencing something new, that can be leveraged into producing something new. Like getting new data allows me to use my imagination to repurpose that data.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Tea. I'm your host, Tanya Tyler, and I'm excited because I'm going to talk to Mr. Mobile Black Wallstreet himself, Mr. Lee Watkins. So before we dive into the conversation, I want to welcome Lee to the show. Welcome, sir.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing?
It's a pleasure to connect with you, sir. It's always a pleasure to connect with you.
Every time.
I always like to give everybody a little bit of an introduction of how I connected with you. You work with one of my former mentors who was on the show, Mr. Mark Gibbons, and we connected through one of his networking events, a collaborative network event that you had. But we've always had a love and a learning of education and the love of being a learner. So before we dive into, how did that come about? Can you introduce yourself? Like tell a little bit about who you are and, maybe some lessons you've learned for the last couple of years.
Okay. So, oh man, again, I'm huge grateful to be on your platform and have this opportunity. But yes, my name is Lee Watkins. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. Been back and forth between Butler County and Hamilton County for a nice portion of my life, and ultimately, I think everybody kind of can relate to some sort of family dynamic thing that they had going on. A lot of fathers weren't in our communities, things like that. So from that, I took on a lot of experiences and what took on a lot of the character of the community that I was in. And with that being said, even though I tried to do things like be entrepreneurial or work and things like that, I still had the influence of my dad, who kind of promoted me towards the streets. Ultimately, fast forward, 25 years old, I was in the streets, got shot in my chest, 2 inches from my heart. Almost never met my firstborn son. And from that, you know, you get that close to an experience, it forces you into some type of reflection. Like you can't have a scenario like that and not have any reflective point. And in that reflective point, I found out that I was dealing with PTSD and things like that, and I found out about being present and how that was so important. And then I realized that the culture as a whole was experiencing something similar. And so I just kind of was like, you know what? I can't continue to play or talk about the culture from the sidelines. Let me get into the game, right? Let me figure out how I can help. Let me figure out how I can be of value to somebody else and add value to others. And ultimately, it led me down a personal development campaign that I've been on, and that's how we got connected when it comes to the to the love of learning. So with that, the company is to grow, stimulate, and strengthen the Black economy, and connect with other entities that have the same mission and bring the resources to the table.
Right. Yeah, it's great. I mean, like I said, I have to. For those who don't know, me and Mr. Lee, we can go ahead and talk for hours when it comes to education and learning. And I didn't always. We were talking about before we got on the show that he thought maybe I had a lifetime of learning, and it's not about who discovered it first or whatever. But I have to laugh because we talk about books, and the one book that I was like, we were on a podcast and I brought up this thing called psycho-cybernetics, and I'm thinking to myself, nobody really knows about this book, but Mr. Lee knew exactly what I was talking about. We even talking about the same exact thing at the same time. So that's really what sort of like gave us a cohesiveness about our love for learning. So we before we were talking about the interview, we were talking about how we didn't grow up with this love of learning. So how did this really, you shared your story, your experience of, going through and getting shot, and it opened up the doorway for personal development. But how did this really like segue into, really becoming a love? I mean, that, there's one thing to say I do it, but then there's another thing to say I love it. So how did you become a student of loving education?
When it first happened, I was listening to YouTube, and then I had heard this one individual talk about something that was spiritual, but through a scientific lens. And all the facts that he said were facts that really stacked up. And when I heard each word, I'm like, man, these points do make sense. And I wanted to understand the philosophy, and he kept talking about his book. And I was like, you know what? I ain't buying that book, man. And I keep listening to his videos. Like, I ain't buying that book. Listen to another video, have another jewel. And it's like, I ain't gonna buy that book either. Right? But then I was like, you know what, man? You gotta do something different. So I bought the book, and I couldn't put it down. Like, and I was just like, man, this is crazy. So I'm over here going through the book, and I'm not just going through the book like just reading. I'm applying at the same time, and I'm seeing real effects take place in my attitude and the way that I address, reality. And it just was just a huge experience for me, because I didn't, by experiencing something new, that can be leveraged into producing something new. Like, getting new data allows me to use my imagination to repurpose that data. You know what I mean? And if the people I'm talking to are always feeding me the same information, then it's kind of hard to, build something new out of that. So when I got this information and it was clear cut, I couldn't deny it. And then from that point, it's become one of those things where, as a sustained love is one of those things where it's like, I was talking to my mom, and this question just came up in my head. And I was just like, are the options in which you choose, far as what to do with your life, are the options that you choose based on what you know? And I was like, I mean, yeah, when you think about it, you can't really say no, because if you didn't know the other options was there, then you wouldn't have. But the only way you can really see those options is being exposed to it in some form or fashion, whether it's TV, internet, or whether you're reading it out of a book. So just knowing that, oh snap, I can raise my potential in life by just observing more out of a page. It's a wrap, So, so that's what got me here.
And as anybody can tell, if you watched it, both of us, we're like, that's how I am when he talks, right? Because I'm like, I'm on every word, because I can relate to your story about the love of learning. And I think I share it with you. And it's like I said, I was telling Mr. Lee, it's not about me, but I'll share a little bit about my story about how I became a love for education, is knowing that to me, it was, being a Black woman, that there were times back in our past that, they didn't allow Black people to read. They put things in a book because they knew specifically that we weren't going to pick it up, because they didn't want us to educate ourselves. So I was like, when I figured that out, I'm like, oh, I'm going to find out every book that I can pick on, and I'm going to figure out them secrets.
Right.
That was my passion behind why I started picking up books, because I was like, they're not going to keep a secret from me. So, but I think what we came across, we had the same kind of passion behind the learning of why, and tie it into what you said. It's not only about reading the information, but you talked about you apply it. So how do you, make that intentional, that you don't just read a book, not for the quality of sake, but how do you apply those things?
Okay. So one thing that I've been doing, and so, okay, in my mind, I think of reading, like true, like you got to studying, and then you have passive reading. And and I don't take this from any specific philosophy or anything like that, but just how I've been noticing, because sometimes, well, let me back up. It requires being present to read something for real. And what can happen is you can be reading something, and then something that pop in your head, you'll be imagining something completely different for a moment, but you're still following the words. And then you come down to the bottom of the page where you have to do an action like flipping the page, is when you realize, like, oh, I wasn't really present, you know. So what I started doing was, well, one of the books I've read, I'll talk about The Power of Repetition. and what is really happening when you're repeating something in your head, or just externally on paper, or repurposing what you're hearing into, or reframing it. I'm sorry. You know, there's synaptic connections and all that stuff is strengthening to retain the information. So what I do literally is I have a notepad. Like I got a bunch of notepads and I got sticky notes all on my stuff. And I write down, like I'll try to take whatever's on the page and like just condense it into like a small note. And then what I'll also do, that's if I'm recapping the page, right? But converting it into something to use, like to actually apply it, I'll actually either write down a sequence in my life where whatever I just read could have applied, or I'll think about specifically an example of me using this. Like, so that way it's like I'm applying the concept to something in my right brain right now. You know what I mean? Like, and that's oh, okay. Okay, so next time when I do this, okay, so what if I'm gonna work on, just say if I'm gonna work on my seduction skills, right? Okay, cool. So word, speaking with a low voice, speaking with the bass of your chest is better. Okay, cool. So I think about myself in like the most like outlandish situation, like I'm James Bond in the casino, and, and I'm just like, and I'm doing it, and it's funny, it's humorous, it makes you laugh like that. It brings emotion into the concept, which further stimulates, something to remember or another anchor point. So those things is how I arm myself to be able to apply it later. And I just, I go over them every time I pick the book back up. I just review my notes really quick and then start back up where I was. So that's how I do it. I got excited.
No worries. Don't apologize. And I want to take the moment because anybody who's enjoying this interview, we're about the halfway mark, and I want to remind everybody that Lee has been dropping some nuggets. So if you've been picking them up, follow down with a comment below, because from one book nerd to another, it's like, ooh,
Yeah.
we are hyper nerdness. Which I always say it lovingly. I always say that lovingly, but people are like, watch your words when I say it. And I'm thinking, but I love it because it applying not only the words that you read, it makes you think about stuff, and then you can process it. Like it gives you a bigger awareness of maybe this is, it's like a Rolodex in your mind. That's how I always picture it when I go for my walks. Is like putting the information is like putting it in a Rolodex. And for those who don't know, that's an old way, but it's a system, like a computer system that will pull up new stuff as you go. But as you think of it and you have a struggle that comes up in your head, something that you read back a couple of weeks ago, even a month ago, even a year ago, will come up to you and to your brain and say, well, this could work. And then and I'm just sharing what I've learned and maybe how we can process it is, you have to have the risk to take the action, correct? So it's not only that the fact that you know and you read and you're thinking about applying it, but then the next part comes to being able to take that risk and see if it works. Is that correct?
Right. Absolutely. Because, if you don't take the risk, then it's stagnant knowledge. And then feel like you'll feel like you have more potential than what's actually happening in your life, because you're not applying anything that's in here that could, furnish the situation. You know what I mean? You're not giving it. So it's like, you know, I mean, you got to be willing to do that, like, and it's actually kind of funny because of the example I just gave. But so one thing I've been doing, right? And I don't mind. I like being personal with things. But one thing that I actually could look back and saying, like, in my life, was that one thing I had a problem with was like rejection. Like, just in general, like especially like talking to women. Like I felt like, oh man, like I got rejected once at like a skating rink, and I was just kind of like, ah man, like, like my heart, you know. But this is so funny. No, but so with that being said, I realized that was an issue later on in my life. And what I did was, at the time, I was I was listening to a bunch of gurus, and I wasn't like great big into the reading, but I was listening enough to the point where I was like, I want to apply more and get a result. Because if I can come up with 1,000 strategies, but if I don't take the risk and actually do it, you know what I'm saying? Like then I'll never, like, she's not going to talk to me because of my strategies. You know what I'm saying? Like you know what I mean? So you know, what I did was it has to do with something called well, now that I look back at it, it's something called exposure therapy, virtually, where you take something that you have an issue with dealing with, and you just go about aggressively dealing with it in that scenario. So I would go, like, I was at the point where I was literally talking to women, like, you know, I go and I'd be like, hey, you know, because I was already kind of like nervous, and I'd be like, hey, so, you know, can you help me out? Like, you know, I'm trying to do some exposure therapy, like, you know, like, if you reject me, like, you know what I'm saying, this is exposing me to more rejection, so that I can realize how powerless this should be over my life. You know what I'm saying? And it was weird. I did it a couple times, but it was just one of those things where it was like, it can't get much more awkward than this. So it's like, you know, effectively overcoming it. So now the strategies actually have a bottleneck to go through. You know what I'm saying? Like an avenue, but yeah, you gotta apply the stuff, man. You gotta just do it. Like,
Right.
you know. So yeah, nah, but I didn't mean to go there, but it just was real. Like, oh man.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And like I said, this is I love the being authentic with people, basically with me sharing as well. So again, thank
Sure.
you for sharing your insight with us. And as we get ready to wrap up, this is the part where I want to ask, what's the one thing you want to leave the audience with? If there's nothing else they can hear from this, what's something you want to leave them with?
All right. If there's one thing I had to leave with this, it would be, don't limit yourself to who you thought you were, and always recognize that your self-image is something that you can mold. Your self-image produces everything in your life. Everything that's inconsistent with who you think you are has entirely to do with your self-image. So if you want the life of a wealthy person, you need to have a self-image of that person. You know, make sure your self-image matches the reality that you want, and be consistent even when everything around you don't look like it, matches.
Right.
That's that's what I got. That's where I'm at in my life. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully that resonated with somebody that heard it.
Oh, I think I know it does, because, like I said, I can relate, and for those who may be interested, and we would, like I said, me and Lee, we connected over psycho-cybernetics. If anybody's not familiar with it, check out Maxwell Maltz, and he talks about your self-image, and he give you more information about that. He's got several books. You can check it out.
Sure.
Read it for yourself. Let it sink
Yeah.
into your own little subconscious mind and see how it could work for you. So again, thank you for sharing your insight. And what's the one thing I want to for those who are looking to maybe connect with you and want to learn more about what you do, how can they find you and connect with you, Mr. Watkins?
You can go to mobileblackwallstreet.com. The email is connect@mobileblackwallstreet. Instagram, Facebook, Mobile Black Wall Street. My personal page is The Real Amazing on Instagram. That's my music name, or my moniker. It's me from A to Z or nothing. So it's really, but you can find me on there. You just put in Lee Watkins, I'll pop up in there as well. So
Again, thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you for sharing your insight and wisdom with us. It's been a pleasure. My unofficial question is, would you be willing to either come back and have a deeper conversation or another conversation?
for sure. What? Absolutely. I want to interview you next time.
Well, we can make that happen. I will turn over
All
the
right,
mic to
cool.
you there, my friend. We could do that.
I'm excited. I'm
I'm
excited.
excited too. Again, thank you for sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your passion for loving and learning and stuff. So hopefully, maybe some people can resonate with that and hopefully pick up the book. Again, it's an amazing book, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And again, I want to remind everybody who tuned in that feedback is always welcome. Remember that links that
Yes.
Lee mentioned will be posted down in the description box below. So please make sure you check out those juicy gems down there. Again, if you've enjoyed today's show, please give us a like, maybe follow up with a comment down below. And again, if you've enjoyed the insight that Lee shared and you want to continue to get more insight that other amazing guests have shared, please hit that subscribe button over there. And remember, take things in stride, go with the flow, and create your own path. And we will see you back here on another episode of Coffee with Tea. All right. Bye-bye.